The U.S. is talking a lot about influence beyond its borders.
One of the ways that you establish peace in your own hemisphere is to make it clear that the United States is going to be respected.
A hemisphere is half the world, but this isn't something that Trump and his team came up with. Let's take it back. Way, way back. We're talking about
the Monroe Doctrines.
The Monroe Doctrine was part of a speech by President, you guessed it, Monroe in 1823. It was a warning to European powers. We should consider any attempt on their part to extend their system to any portion of this hemisphere as dangerous to our peace and safety. Basically, Monroe's telling Europe, keep out of the Americas. North, South, Central, we'll take your influence there as a threat. The US was a new country without a lot of military power, so Europe kind of ignored the doctrine for a while. But as the US grew more powerful, its influence over the Americas did too. It pointed to the doctrine as it supported other nations, including during a fight between Venezuela and Britain in 1895. Prime Minister Wilfrid Laurier even used the doctrine as a reason that Canada didn't have to worry too much about defense. Between the US and Britain, Canada would be all right. Then along came Theodore Roosevelt with what's known as the Roosevelt corollary. In the early 1900s, Theodore Roosevelt said that the US would step in reluctantly if Latin American countries were engaged in flagrant wrongdoing or if they weren't repaying their debts. This was a huge shift, putting the US in an active role as, in Roosevelt's words, an international police power. Since then, the doctrine has been invoked fairly regularly, usually but not always in the Americas, expanding to encompass this idea of the Western Hemisphere. In the early 20th century, the US intervened all over Latin America. In World War II, the US invoked the Monroe Doctrine again to protect Greenland after Denmark was invaded by Germany. Then it kind of never left, with a treaty giving the US a role in Greenland's defense. The Monroe Doctrine was also a US argument against Soviet influence during the Cold War. And it was a reason the US gave in 1989 when it invaded Panama to capture leader Manuel Noriega. It's important to note, not every US intervention has directly invoked the doctrine, but Roosevelt's framing of the US as international police has been used by both fans and critics of the concept. That long history more or less brings us to now.
They now call it the Monroe Document, I don't know.
Even in Trump's first term, his administration praised the Monroe Doctrine and talked about military interventions, but not much actually happened. Now, in Trump's second term, that rhetoric is back.
That's how we see the future of the Western Hemisphere.
The Western Hemisphere.
They're in our hemisphere.
What happens next? We don't know, but it set many leaders across the hemisphere on alert.